We'll go on to the opponents, and the first one opponent, it would be Representative Pat Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. I'm Representative Pat Proctor. I serve the people of Leavenworth and Fort Leavenworth here in the State House. But I'm actually here today as a Kansas citizen and as a veteran and also as a Homeland Security expert. I teach in the Homeland Security program at Wichita State. I'm not here representing Wichita State. I'm representing myself here, but I bring that knowledge to bear as I talk to you today. Our founders were deeply suspicious of the military. They had just fought a revolutionary war against the British where law was being enforced by soldiers, and they did not want that for our nation. And many times in our history, we barely had an army at all in this country. I mean, it was just a handful of companies, a few hundred soldiers at some points in our history. And it's because the founders were deeply suspicious of having a standing army. They saw it as a threat to liberty for much of our history. And it's really enshrined in our law, in our Constitution, and in our Kansas Constitution. It's carried over that there's a clear separation between law enforcement and military. Because law enforcement, their purpose is to keep the peace. Why we call them peace officers. They keep the peace in our communities. The purpose of the military is to defend the country against the enemies of the state. And when you put the military in charge of law enforcement, the people start to look like enemies of the state. And our founders realized that. And that's why they never gave the military the role of law enforcement. Now there is the Insurrection Act. The president, if all hell breaks loose someplace, the president can declare an insurrection and can have the military temporarily enforce law. But those are very restricted cases, and the military doesn't enforce the law. I'd like to give you a few examples. When we send the military down to the southern border to assist the Border Patrol in enforcing our immigration law, they don't arrest anybody. They provide their equipment to observe the border and then tell law enforcement when they observe something, and then the law enforcement goes and enforces the law. Another example, when I was at the Big Red One, we were bringing the Gray Eagle, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle, to Fort Riley. We went through machination after machination to make sure that equipment was not ever used accidentally or intentionally to surveil Kansans. There are very strict areas where it can be flown because we understood that that was a violation of the liberty of civilians. This bill, I appreciate that the proponent noted that they meant detection, not detention, but I'm troubled by detection too, because detection is surveillance. What we are doing is we are setting up an agency under the military with the mission of surveilling Kansans. That's what detection means. Make no mistake about it. I'm really glad that this bill was brought because I think it uncovers something that's been growing and creeping inside Kansas that a lot of us weren't aware of, which is that the military is already doing this. And I hope not only that this bill gets tabled, but that we go back and we do some legislation to put Homeland Security functions firmly under the Attorney General. That's really the two things I'd leave you with, and before I stand for questions, are at best, this is redundant because we already have an Attorney General and a KBI and a Highway Patrol that are enshrined in our statutes and Constitution with the law enforcement function. And so why we need to set up an opposing law enforcement arm under the National Guard. And I appreciate he says, well, when he's the Director of Homeland Security, he's not a general officer. Yeah, I mean, if somebody comes to him with a question, does he take off his stars, sit him on the table, answer the question, and put him back on? It's a distinction without a difference. So at best, this is redundant, but at worst, this is this is harmful. right? We, at the national level right now, we are wrestling with the consequences of having formed the Homeland Security Department at the national level. And, there's a lot of concern that the laws that were designed to combat foreign terrorism are now being used against American citizens. So why we would set up voluntarily the same system in Kansas just confounds me. And I could go on all day, Mr. Chair, but I won't. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Johnson?
Thank you very much for that. Would you mind just, because I know your background, can you talk a little bit about the powers that the governor has with the National Guard and largely what we're doing with the National Guard in the way of natural disasters and so on? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This came to light all over again over the whole vaccination controversy and mandatory vaccination. And some of the members here in this room signed on to a letter with me to the TAG asking him under what authority he could demand vaccinations when we had passed a law saying that the state agencies couldn't mandate vaccines. And he gave us a tutorial on the fact that this isn't really a state militia. Since the reform of the War Department time in 1918, the Guard is actually, when you enlist in the Guard, you're both a Kansas National Guards person, and then you're also in the National Guard of the United States. And because of that, the president can activate the Guard to go to Iraq, go to Afghanistan, go to the border. And when they're activated under that, they're under Title 10 authorities. They're basically no different than an active duty soldier. Because they're also the Kansas National Guard, the governor can activate them under Title 32. We pay their salary, and they have different authorities. And that, in that capacity, they can do some quasi law enforcement things, but generally they're not used unless like I said, all hell's broken loose and they're doing like riot control or something like that.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.